Good morning. Yes, John Glenn dies at 95 years old, surrounded by family members yesterday at the Ohio State University Wexner Medical Center. He, of course, was a big donor to Ohio State University, also a big benefactor of the university. Buildings there named in his honor. The airport at Columbus is not far from his hometown, named in his honor this past year. That may have been his last public appearance last June. He had been in failing health, but at 95 was still said to be getting around just fine. He and his wife, Annie, were married for 73 years, Jay. They met when they were babies.
You know, he was the first man, or one of the first men, to orbit the Earth, and he was also a U.S. Senator for 20-plus years.
Yeah, spent over 2 decades in the United States Senate, seen as a bridge builder and somebody who could work with members of both parties. But in some ways, that may not have served him so well. He wasn't as liberal as a lot of Democrats were in the 70s and 80s, and had trouble winning favor with his own party. But eventually, he did. I think launched along partly by his star status as a former astronaut, and he was seen as somebody who could work with just about anybody, but saw his own share of controversy during his time as a lawmaker too.
He's one of those individuals that I think everyone unanimously agrees was kind of an American hero, somebody we all looked up to.
Absolutely. He first flew when he was 8 years old, was in an open cockpit biplane, and fell in love with aviation at that point. Later, he earned his wings. He was a Marine pilot in World War II and then in Korea, then a test pilot, and eventually went to work for NASA as an astronaut. And he was undoubtedly brave back in those days. You're climbing on top of a gigantic rocket that there are no guarantees that it's not going to explode right there on the launch pad. But he did that, and wanted to further the space program. That was part of his mission throughout his life, and in fact, at age 77, became the oldest person to go into orbit when he flew aboard the Space Shuttle Discovery. NASA, trying to reinvigorate interest in the space program, decided to choose Glenn, and he served him well.
Praise has been coming in from around the world for Jim Glenn, all over Twitter and Facebook and across the news.
Absolutely. From around the world, people know about him and know his story in the same way that Americans know about Yuri Gagarin, others around the world in Russia, and they know about John Glenn. And so, I think you can expect to see that tributes being paid to John Glenn from all corners of the globe. His body will lie in state at the Ohio Capitol, and then there will be a burial at some point at the Arlington National Cemetery.
Jim Ryan, ABC News correspondent, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Thanks, Jay.
It is 6:55. I remember John Glenn. I remember that, but I was a kid. But it was a big deal. And in those days, you would, when things like that happened, any part of the space program, the NASA program, everyone would gather around the television, or if you were in school and your school was lucky enough to have a television, you'd stop class and you'd watch the launch, or you'd watch the landing. And then all of a sudden, with the space shuttles and some of the other parts of NASA, it just became routine. It wasn't exciting anymore. It became commonplace for us to visit space. But in those early days, when we were competing with Russia, and Russia was ahead of us, and all of a sudden we're sending people to orbit the Earth, that was a big deal for the United States.
Absolutely. And I feel like maybe a generation like mine, and I think Kristen could feel the same, we kind of got robbed a little bit and kind of missing out on all that excitement there. And I think there's also a mixture of fear involved too. I think when I've heard stories that when people saw Sputnik and heard about it flying through the sky, oh my God, it's going over the U.S., they can reach us now. There was a mixture of fear then, and then it became competition, and then Kennedy and his speeches, and we don't do it because it's easy. And then you say something about routine. You ask any astronaut, there's something routine about going to space or taking off from Earth, and ask all the engineers about that stuff. But I think I like to say that NASA's coming back a little bit.
Absolutely.
We don't know where it's going. We keep on hearing that there wants to be a Mars mission, but I'm not holding my breath on that one.
Well, I think Mars will become the new moon. I mean, as we start heading to Mars, that's when I believe it'll get exciting again for people. This concept, it just blows my mind. I can't even get my head around the idea that we can put ourselves in a small capsule and rocket ourselves out and might possibly land on Mars. The idea is just beyond me.
Yeah, we do it for the adventure. We do it for the exploration aspect of it. Could we one day colonize Mars? I don't know. We're going to do a different discussion at that point there. But I think for the adventure of it all, and that's why we do it, because we can. And that, at these days, at least, I think the world is more aligned and united, at least in the space programs, I feel like, whereas back then it was very competitive. Now I think the countries are kind of deciding, hey, putting resources together kind of helps.
Right. If I were in that Mars flight, I'd have to go by myself. I could not be in the same place with someone for that long a period of time. They would drive me crazy. Little things would start to drive me crazy. They'd start chomping on their potato chips, and that'd be the end of it. We'd end up killing one another. But it is 6:58.